Have you ever thought about this? Why don't we see giant insects crawling around us today? I mean, imagine walking down the street and suddenly a dragonfly the size of a dog flies past your head. Sounds crazy, right? But here's the shocking part. Millions of years ago, this was not science fiction. During the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago, Earth was home to dragonflies with wingspans of almost 70 centimeters, giant millipedes longer than a human, and spiders that could cover an entire dinner plate. So the big question is, why were insects so huge back then? And why are they relatively small today? To answer that, we need to dive into one of the most fascinating aspects of biology and Earth's history: the role of oxygen. Now, you might think oxygen is just the thing we breathe every second, but it's far more than that. Oxygen is basically the fuel that runs life. It powers your cells, it helps you think, move, and even keeps your heart beating. But here's the twist. Oxygen doesn't just keep us alive, it also decides how big and powerful living things can become. If you increase oxygen levels, the rules of life change completely. And this is exactly what happened millions of years ago. Around 300 million years ago, the Earth's atmosphere wasn't like what we breathe today. Right now, the air contains about 21% oxygen. But during the Carboniferous period, oxygen levels skyrocketed to nearly 35%. That's almost double. And when oxygen rises that much, life starts to behave differently. Insects, which don't have lungs like us, rely on small tubes called tracheae to deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. Normally, this system limits their size because oxygen can only diffuse so far inside their bodies. But with more oxygen in the atmosphere, suddenly those limitations disappeared. The tracheal system could now carry oxygen deeper and faster, and insects could grow to massive sizes without suffocating. That's why we saw those giant dragonflies and enormous millipedes dominating the land. To put this in perspective, imagine if humans suddenly lived in an atmosphere with double the oxygen. Our bodies would feel like high-performance engines, running faster, healing quicker, and maybe even growing stronger. But of course, there's a catch, and we'll get to that later. For now, just remember, higher oxygen equals bigger insects. This is not a theory. This has been confirmed through both fossils and experiments. One fascinating study was done in the early 2000s by paleobiologist Alexander Kaiser and his colleagues. They raised insects like beetles and cockroaches in controlled lab chambers where oxygen levels were adjusted. What they found was astonishing. Insects raised in higher oxygen grew larger, faster, and sometimes even developed body parts bigger than normal. These experiments, which were first highlighted in the journal PNAS and later repeated in several universities, basically recreated the conditions of the Carboniferous period inside modern labs. And the results supported the fossil record perfectly. Oxygen is the key factor behind insect gigantism. But before we go further, let's pause and imagine this for a second. Picture yourself sitting in a forest, but instead of hearing tiny buzzing mosquitoes, you hear the loud beating wings of a dragonfly bigger than a football. Imagine millipedes crawling past you that are thicker than your arm. This was Earth 300 million years ago, an alien planet compared to today, even though it was the same Earth. And oxygen was the invisible force shaping it all. Now, you might be asking, if oxygen was so great for insects, why did they shrink back down? Why don't we still see dog-sized dragonflies today? The answer is equally fascinating. After the Carboniferous, oxygen levels in the atmosphere dropped sharply. By the Permian period, around 250 million years ago, and oxygen levels fell closer to what we have now, about 21%. That drop meant that large insects could no longer survive. Their tracheal system couldn't deliver enough oxygen to their big bodies anymore. So over time, natural selection favored smaller insects that could survive in the new, lower oxygen environment. And that's why insects today are mostly tiny compared to their ancient cousins. Another big change came with the rise of birds and later bats. Giant insects may have been kings when the skies were empty, but once fast and agile predators evolved, being huge became a disadvantage. Smaller insects could hide, escape, and survive better. So evolution took care of the rest. In other words, oxygen made insects giants, but falling oxygen levels and new predators forced them back down to size. Let's take a little detour here and think about oxygen in our own lives. We usually think more oxygen means better, but is that always true? Well, not really. For humans and most animals, too much oxygen can actually be dangerous. There's a condition called oxygen toxicity, which divers sometimes face when breathing pure oxygen under pressure. Too much oxygen can damage cells, create harmful molecules called free radicals, and even lead to seizures or lung damage. So while insects thrived in high oxygen conditions thanks to their unique physiology, mammals like us might not do so well. This makes the story even more interesting. Oxygen isn't simply good or bad, it's a delicate balance. Now let's get back to our insects. Another cool experiment worth mentioning happened in the 1960s. Students and researchers in the United States started experimenting with small animals and insects in oxygen-rich chambers. Some insects did show increased size or faster development, but many other animals suffered from oxygen toxicity. These early studies hinted at something we understand much better today. Oxygen shapes evolution, but every species reacts differently. This raises a hypothetical but exciting question. What if we changed oxygen levels again today? What if our atmosphere suddenly had 30-35% oxygen like in the Carboniferous? Would we start seeing giant insects return? Theoretically, yes. If the environment supported it, and if insects could adapt, we might see larger species evolving again. But it wouldn't happen overnight. Evolution takes thousands, even millions of years. Still, the possibility is fascinating. Just imagine, future humans living in oxygen-rich domes on other planets might encounter insect life far larger than what we see on Earth today. This isn't just speculation. Astrobiologists consider oxygen one of the most important elements when predicting alien ecosystems. Speaking of other planets, NASA and other space agencies have actually studied how different oxygen levels affect life, because this could help us understand alien biology. If we discover a planet with higher oxygen, it could mean completely different rules for evolution. Perhaps massive bugs, enormous amphibians, or even creatures that look like something out of science fiction. And all of this knowledge comes from studying tiny insects here on Earth. Another fascinating detail is how insects breathe. Unlike us, they don't use lungs. Instead, they have spiracles, tiny openings on their bodies that lead to a network of tubes carrying oxygen directly to tissues. This system works perfectly for small creatures, but it doesn't scale up well. That's why, under today's 21% oxygen, insects can't grow beyond a certain limit. But under 35% oxygen, diffusion works much more effectively, and suddenly, their size limit jumps. So oxygen isn't just about survival. It literally sets the boundaries of how big a creature can get. Now let's connect all of this back to evolution. Evolution is not random magic. It's shaped by the environment. Change the atmosphere, and you change evolution itself. During the Carboniferous, high oxygen rewrote the rules, giving us giant insects. Later, falling oxygen and new predators rewrote the rules again, shrinking them back down. This is a powerful reminder of how life on Earth is always dancing with its environment, constantly adapting. So here's something to think about. Could humans evolve differently in a high oxygen world? Some scientists believe that while we might not grow into giants, we could see physiological changes like faster healing, higher energy, and maybe even changes in brain function. In fact, experiments with hyperbaric oxygen therapy used in modern medicine show that higher oxygen can speed up recovery and sometimes even stimulate stem cell growth. So oxygen doesn't just change insects. And finally, let's wrap this into one big picture. Oxygen is invisible, but it's one of the most powerful forces in evolution. It shaped the forests of the Carboniferous. It created a world of giant insects, and it continues to influence life today. Without oxygen, there's no fire, no movement, no life. With too little oxygen, life suffocates. With too much, life mutates. It's a razor's edge, and Earth has danced on that edge for billions of years. So the next time you see a tiny dragonfly zipping around a pond, remember this. You are looking at the descendant of ancient giants, creatures that once ruled the skies, powered by an atmosphere rich in oxygen, living in a world that feels like science fiction to us. And who knows, maybe somewhere out there, on another planet with higher oxygen, their cousins still fly, bigger and stronger than ever.